students, I'm back with your next class. In today's class, we are going to discuss regarding another population interaction, which is parasitism. Okay, now parasitism, just like predation, is a similar kind of interaction, that is a plus minus interaction, where one of the organism is going to get benefited, the other one is going to get harmed. Okay, the one which is going to get benefited is called the parasite, whereas the one that is getting harmed here is called the host. Okay, now here, the just like in predation, you have learned that the predator is going to eat up the prey, isn't it? Here the parasite is not going to feed upon the host, rather it is going to spend a part or whole of its lifetime on or inside. That means you can say on the surface of the body of the host, or else sometimes inside the body of the host. And while doing so, the parasite will extract nourishment and shelter from the host body. Understood? That's how the parasite is going to benefit, whereas the host is going to be completely harmed. Understood this? So let's see what the definition would be. See, parasitism. In parasitism, one species benefits, that is the parasite, and it is detrimental to the other, which is the host. Now, here the parasite spends a part or whole of its life on or in the body of the host and gets nourishment or shelter from it. Alright, which I have already mentioned to you. Many parasites are host specific and both tend to co-evolve. That means, see, most of the parasites, they have to require certain special kind of mechanisms to enter the body of the host or to conquer the body of the host. So because of that, not all parasites can, adapt to so many mechanisms that it can go and, parasitize over so many hosts. That is usually not possible. That's why most of the parasites are host specific. They are going to be, they are going to develop mechanisms to only parasitize on certain specific host. On the other hand, this thing that both tend to co-evolve, this usually or generally means that see, sometimes as per evolution, the host might take up certain kind of mechanism on its own. It might evolve with certain mechanisms by which it can protect itself from the parasite, isn't it? But then usually the parasite will also co-evolve. Okay, as soon as the host will evolve, likewise the parasite also would have certain survival instincts, isn't it? So in that case, the parasite will also co-evolve and take up spatial adaptation so that it can counteract the new mechanisms that has been developed in the host. So likewise, the host and parasite's relationship will be continuously maintained, and that's why the continuous association will remain. The parasite and the host will not be able to stop the interaction, rather the interaction will keep occurring over the generations. Understood this? Fine. Next. Now, there are certain adaptations shown in the parasite so that it can properly feed upon or it can grow along with the host. Okay. So these are, first, loss of unnecessary sense organs. These unnecessary sense organs would simply complicate or make the life cycle or the body of the parasite much more complex, isn't it? The more the complex, the more it would be a problem to adapt or to evolve. So in that case, unnecessary sense organs would be missing in the parasite. Next, presence of adhesive organs or suckers to cling onto the host. Obviously, this is going to be required. These are the first steps that would be required by the parasite to parasitize over the host. Next, loss of digestive organs, because the parasite is going to usually take up the nourishment from the host itself, so that's why well developed digestive organs are not required. High reproductive capacity, of course the parasite will have to grow at a rapid rate so that its invasion on the host may remain, right? And finally, complex life cycle involving one or two intermediate hosts to facilitate parasitization of primary host. There are two important examples to clarify this point to you. See, most of the time the parasite will not have only one host, or rather it will complete its life cycle with two or more than two hosts. Okay, that's how it will be able to complete its life cycle. Like for example, the human liver fluke, it depends on two intermediate hosts, that is a snail and a fish, to complete its life cycle. Okay. Likewise, the malarial parasite, which all of you know about, isn't it? The malarial parasite Plasmodium also needs a vector. So the intermediate host is also known as the vector. So the vector is the mosquito, which all of you know about, to spread to the host. So these are some spatial mechanisms that are or adaptations which are found in the parasite so that it can properly interact with the host. Now let us learn regarding the impact of the parasite on the body of the host. Of course, it is going to be detrimental at various levels, which are as follows. Like, the parasite may reduce the survival of the host. It may also reduce the growth and reproduction of the host and reduce the host population density. Finally, it renders host more vulnerable to predation by making it physically weak. So that means what? A parasite can, negatively impact the host at various levels, isn't it? It will not allow the host to grow or have a overall growth and development. It will be hampering, or it will be negatively impacting the reproduction or population density of the host, and finally it will make it vulnerable to various types of predation, because when the host is going to be physically weak, at that time it is easy to be predated over it. So it will be easier for the predator to feed upon it. So in that case, parasitism would be overall having a detrimental effect on the host in various ways. Okay. Now let us learn regarding the types of parasites. See, any kind of parasite can be broadly categorized into two divisions or two categories: ectoparasite and endoparasite. Ecto itself means outside, endo means inside. So from the name itself you can very well get the idea of it, right? So ectoparasites means they feed on the external surface of the host organism. So they would not get inside the body of the host, they would remain on the surface, and from outside itself they will take shelter or they will take nourishment from the body of the host. For example, lice on human, ticks on dogs, cuscuta. Cuscuta, you very well know, it's a parasitic plant, isn't it? It has evolved to not have any contact with the soil, neither does it have chlorophyll so that it can photosynthesize. So that's why cuscuta would be, forming certain hostorial roots by which it will invade both xylem and phloem of the host, taking water and minerals from the xylem and, organic solute or food from the phloem. So it's a complete parasite on hedge plants. Mostly it is found on hedge plants, right? Locally we call it Akash Bale. Fine. Anyways, next regarding endoparasites. Endoparasites inside. So in that case, this particular parasite would be found inside the body of the host. So they live inside the host body at different sites. So that means in different organs. They can be found in liver, they can be found in the RBC, etc. Their life cycle is much more complex due to external specializations, but morphological or anatomical features are going to be simple. Alright. Now, they mainly emphasize on reproductive potential. So, what they basically do is going inside or getting inside the body of the host, rather than simply completing their life cycle or rather than just taking nourishment or shelter, they would also put a lot of emphasis on increasing in their number. So reproductive potential is going to be maximum emphasized by the endoparasite once inside the host. Example is of course the most common being malarial parasite, which will be housing the human RBC to multiply, isn't it? By multiple fission it would continuously increase in number, and finally malarial symptoms would show up in the host, isn't it? So these being the discussion regarding the types of parasite. Now there are a few interesting terms related to parasitism. Let us learn about them. Now for some fun facts regarding parasitism. I hope all of you like it. The first one is hyperparasite. Okay, how one parasite will be inside another, and then again inside that would be there would be another parasite. Likewise, it's about hyperparasitism. Okay, see here. The bacteriophage which are parasite over parasitic bacteria Pasteurella pestis is parasite on rat flea, which is a rat parasite. Understood this? That means what? First, there is this rat. Inside the rat, there is rat flea, okay, which is a rat parasite. Inside this rat flea is another parasite, that's a bacteria, Pasteurella pestis. And inside this bacteria again there is a bacteriophage, that means the virus, isn't it? So rat, inside that rat flea, inside that there is the bacteria Pasteurella pestis, inside that there is a bacteriophage or the virus. So hence it is an example of hyperparasitism. Understood? Now next is brood parasitism. Brood parasitism is something very uncommon. It's not here that typically a parasite is living on or inside the body of the host. No. It occurs among the birds, okay, where one parasitic bird will be actually laying its eggs, okay, on the nest of another bird, which will here act as the host. And then it will be, the parasitic bird would have also already evolved certain mechanisms by which its eggs will resemble exactly like the eggs of the host, okay, and that's how it will allow the host to incubate its eggs, okay. That's what is called brood parasitism, okay. Let's see. It is found among birds where parasitic birds lay its eggs in the nest of its host and lets the host incubate it. The most famous example would be cuckoo, which lays its eggs in crow's nest. So here cuckoo is the parasite and crow is the host. Alright. So during the course of evolution, the eggs of parasitic birds have evolved to resemble the host eggs in size and color to reduce the chances of host bird detecting the foreign eggs and ejecting them from the nest. So understood, this is a very different kind of parasitism, where exactly the parasite is not being in the body of the host and taking nourishment or shelter from it. Rather, it's laying its eggs in the nest of the host bird and is trying it's trying to deceive the host bird to incubate its eggs. Okay, so that's how it's different, and also it's very, very important for your exam. Brood parasitism is an important topic for your exam. Okay, so that's all regarding parasitism. I hope all of you are clear about it. Next, let us discuss another type of population interaction, that is ammensilism. Now, let us discuss regarding another important population interaction, that is ammensilism. Ammensilism is a -0 kind of population interaction. That means here one of the organism would be affected or would be harmed, whereas the other one would neither be harmed nor be benefited. Okay, that's called ammensilism. Fine, so let's see what it is all about. See, here one species would inhibit the growth of the other species by secreting certain chemicals. So see, as an organism grows, okay, as a particular organism grows, as its life cycle itself, as because of different types of metabolic reactions going on inside the body of the organism, it naturally might secrete certain kind of chemicals. Okay, so when it releases those chemicals, it is not going to be harmful or beneficial to that organism. It's something happening due to a not natural process, isn't it? But due to that chemical being secreted, some other organism in the surrounding, in the immediate surrounding, might get harmed, isn't it? That's how, in case of ammensilism, that's what is happening. One of the organism is getting harmed, but the other organism, which is secreting the chemical, is neither getting harmed or getting benefited by the process. Understood? That's what is ammensilism. Fine? Clear? Now, the organism which inhibits the growth is called ammensil. So the organism which is secreting the chemical is going to be called as the ammensil. Now, the phenomena of inhibition of growth of one species by the other through chemical secretion is called allelopathy. In case it's happening in plants, we will call it allelopathy, or we can also call it antibiosis or biological antagonism. These are very important terms. Rather, in your question paper itself, the first question that was asked in 1 mark question once was, what is allelopathy? Okay, that's how very important these terminologies are. So do remember this, terminologies. Allelopathy means the phenomena of inhibition of growth of one species by the other. In case it is happening in plants, we will be mainly calling it allelopathy. Okay, or antibiosis or biological antagonism. Alright, next. Important examples of amencillisms are Penicillium, the fungi, okay, which is very well known for producing the first antibiotic penicillin, isn't it? So Penicillium secretes penicillin. It's a natural process for it, but it inhibits the growth of various bacteria or not. So here the penicillium is going to act as a amensel, and the bacteria whose growth is getting inhibited by penicillin, they are going to be harmed here. Alright? Next. Streptomyces, that is actinomycetes. We also commonly call them the ray fungi. Okay, these are also very well known for secreting chemicals which can be very well used for making antibiotics. Okay, so Streptomyces, that is an actinomycetes species, produces wide range of chemicals which also inhibits growth of various bacteria. That's why they are very popular for making antibiotics. Alright, next. Roots of black walnut, that is Juglans regia, it secretes a chemical called juglone, okay, which is toxic to other plants like apple, alfalfa, etc. Alright. And the last one is Convolvulus urbensis. Okay, Convolvulus urbensis is a field weed, you can say. Okay, it is a weed which grows usually in the wheat fields. So once it starts growing in the wheat field, it is very tough, or it's very difficult to control the weed, and in that case it captures the entire field in no time and causes a very harm, or causes a great amount of reduction in the production or yield of the wheat. Okay, so Convolvulus urbensis inhibits the growth of wheat. Understood? So these being important examples under amencillism, I hope both the interactions that we've discussed today, that is parasitism and amencillism, are clear to you. With that, we'll complete the class for today. In the next class, we'll start with mutualism. Thank you.